Podcasters Roundtable, round 38, podcasting and the law. Dun, dun, dun. It's time to get some podcasters in trouble. No, maybe we can get them out of trouble. But first off, I just want to say, if you are new to Podcasters Roundtable, go to podcastersroundtable.com. That's where you can subscribe and be notified of future rounds, which is a good thing, because if you can attend live, that's really fun, and participate in the chat room. Plus, we know you're out there, and I can get you onto a roundtable in the future. But also, this show is available as an audio-only podcast. So you can get over there and subscribe, or wherever your favorite podcatcher is, wherever you get your podcasts from. Just search for Podcasters Roundtable. You'll find us in there, and hopefully you can listen, because there's always the archive. More people will listen to the archive than can make it live. And so definitely catch the archive. And this might be one that you really want to catch, because it's a little different today, or this evening, wherever you're coming in from. I've got the good lights in studio here because, well, the sun goes down earlier now, and I can't rely on the nice window light. So I'll get some nice lighting going on. And but this one a little different in that, it's probably less of a discussion. It's going to be a lot more of questions, because we actually have not one, two lawyers. Does that cancel the other out? I don't know. We'll see. Maybe
one more, and it's critical mass, and we'll get.
Oh, see, and I did juggle the idea of having one more, but I thought it might get a little crowded. Now, Daniel, last second. By the way, I tried to throw up a lower third right before we went live and totally crashed the system. So we're a few minutes late. Thank you in the chat. If you're listening to archive, you never know that, but these are the fun things you go through in a live show. And apparently, Daniel could not make it. I think he'll be in the chat.
And someone's frozen.
So I'm going to say, is that just me, or did Ray?
I've got Ray frozen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Dave, why don't you introduce us?
Right. Oh, there we go.
There he goes.
And he's back.
And he's back. I was talking to the audio audience, so we're still rolling in the show. But woo! Last week's show was when everything goes wrong. This week's show, as Dave mentioned before we got on, might be part 2, right? All right, let's try to get through this. Let's actually meet the roundtable. Dave coming in from some undisclosed location, some bunker, but it has curtains. It can't be a bunker. Dave, welcome back.
Yeah, Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting from the lovely metropolis of Livonia, Michigan, better known as Detroit, where I'm doing some lovely training this week. So I've never been so happy to fire up a computer and see Wi-Fi connection excellent. I was like, oh. So, but yeah, I have a laptop from the early '90s apparently, so I'm almost in black and white. It's awesome. But I'm here, and that's what counts. So.
It is awesome. It's awesome that you can be here that way. We've had successful people coming in, people coming from, that probably were successful too, but we had people successfully coming in from hotels on the Wi-Fi, which, a few years ago, almost forget about it. Yeah. Still sketchy today, but hopefully you'll hang with us. And from Detroit, another team that the Giants defeat in the World Series. Sorry, I had to get that in there. Podcasting is, you learn a little bit about your podcasters. And if you know me, the San Francisco Giants, a big part of my life. We talked a little bit about it back and forth with Jim Collison. That's also maybe one of the reasons I busted out the nice lights. But congrats to San Francisco Giants fans and the Giants. But that's a little bit more, if you didn't know that about me, pretty hardcore. And since we won the World Series, if you have no clue what I'm talking about, that's what I'm referring to. All right. We'll move on. I alienated so many people with that one statement. And Royals fans, I'm sorry. Next year, it's an odd year. You get what I'm talking about. Gordon, thanks for joining the roundtable.
Thank you so much for having me, Ray. It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to the talk.
Gordon's got that awesome voice. Gordon is a lawyer. What do you specialize in, Gordon?
My practice is entertainment law, primarily independent film and theater, and pretty much any other kind of new media that comes in. So the oldest media, theater, and the newest stuff is the kind of stuff I like to work with.
Yeah, I've had you on the Podcaster Studio before, and you're kind of the go-to guy when I talk about laws pertaining to podcasting, because you do deal in new media and you're a podcaster, so you get it. So this is your first roundtable, correct?
Yes.
It's good that I'm losing track of who's been on the roundtable. It means we've done enough rounds to forget who has been on here. So first time roundtabler, Mr. Gordon Firemark, an actual lawyer here on on the set of the Roundtable. And next to him, also first-time Roundtabler. And I don't know, maybe, do you have a podcast, Greg? Welcome to the Roundtable.
Yes, thanks a lot, Ray. I appreciate it. Can you hear me all right, by the way?
I can hear you, yes.
Great. Yeah, I have a podcast called the Patent Podcast. I'm a patent attorney in Atlanta. I've been practicing for 30 years and just do just traditional patent law. I do some trademark and copyright, but mainly patents. The mousetrap that people come up with, I protect that and try to help people protect that.
Awesome. So we have some, really good expertise here on this round, and you can already tell we've heard the word patent. I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about that, and we'll talk about all the other issues that hopefully we cover most of what I hear, what Dave hears, what Gordon, Greg, what all of us hear when we're talking to podcasters. And I think, we could probably light this candle with the doozy of them all. And podcasters always want to know about music, right? What music can I use in my show? Because when you go out there and you start a podcast, most podcasts are audio only, but everyone wants to have that killer intro, and they love that AC/DC song, and they just have to use that song in their podcast. And if you've done this long enough, don't go there, right? Don't go there. Dave, now Dave's a musician and a podcaster, right? So Dave, did you ever use copyrighted music in your podcast?
Not on a regular basis. I have slipped occasionally. I remember
sprinkled it in there.
There's a couple where I was like, this song just fits perfect, and I'm like, all right, I'll beg for forgiveness. But it is one of those things that makes you worried. Like you post that, and like 2 days later, you're like, and here's the thing that got me. I did a thing on the podcast review show where we're playing snippets from somebody's podcast, and he had unlicensed music, unbeknownst to me, as his theme song. And we're doing it as a hangout on air, and I go to post the video from Google, and it's like, I don't think so. And Google had identified his song in the video and instantly just smacked me upside the head, and I was like, that's some spooky technology. So they definitely have the technology to find it if they want to go get it. I was like, so, that's when I was like, okay, I'm never playing music again on my show.
Yeah, and I mean, I have a YouTube channel that I post stuff to often, and YouTube, they catch everything now. And what's nice on, they have a system where you're not always in trouble. You can put a link to sell the music. Depends on, I guess, if the artist has a relationship with YouTube. I'm not sure how that works, but Gordon probably knows. But Gordon, what do podcasters need to know when it comes to music? I often tell them, if you don't own it, don't use it.
Right. I would expand that to say, if you don't own it or have permission, don't use it. And that's really what it comes down to.
Even permission scares me. You know why? Because I'm not sure if we did talk about this on the podcast studio before, but even some artists don't have the right to say you can use my music.
That's exactly right. You need to have permission from the correct people, and that is not always easy to determine. And sometimes it's a moving target. I mean, the companies that own this stuff are merging and splitting stuff off, and it gets pretty crazy. So, if you're talking about something like your theme song and you're going to use the same piece of music over and over and over again, it probably makes sense to do the legwork and find out who owns it and get the written license agreement that you need. I mean, Dan Miller on his podcast talked about how I think he pays $100 a year or something silly small for taking care of business. I think it is, and so it is possible to do it, but it's tricky and fraught with peril.
But Gordon, I'm only going to use 9 seconds.
Is it the key 9 seconds?
So come on, that's what we hear all the time. People are like, I'm just using a tiny bit, just a tiny bit.
And I'm going to talk over that 9 seconds. I'm going to talk over the 9 seconds.
Okay, and so now you're taking the 9 seconds and making something else out of it, which is another.
Let's deal with this. Let's deal with the very small segment first, then.
Okay, so there are all kinds of misconceptions and rumors and just wrong ideas out there about this stuff, and the problem is there's some truth in it as well. There's a doctrine in American copyright law that stems from our First Amendment. It's called the Fair Use Doctrine, and basically it's a defense to complaints of infringement that says, look, we're using it for certain kinds of use that we as a society think are valuable enough that we're going to authorize it even though it's a copy. And small amounts is a factor. There's 4 factors that have to be considered, and they all weigh differently, and each instance is its own analysis. But small amounts, the kind of use, the impact on the commercial market for the stuff that's being taken, all of these are factors that get considered. And the problem is you can't decide in advance that it's going to be fair use. It's a judge or a jury that ultimately gets to decide that. So,
where does fair use really come into play? Which podcasters are going to use fair use successfully?
Well, where it comes in most commonly is when you're doing sort of real journalism or movie reviews or those kinds of things where you're talking about and criticizing, commenting on the thing that you're taking, that you're using. So if you're reviewing the latest, Rocky 17 movie and you play a clip from the movie, that's going to constitute fair use in most instances, because that critical commentary, that fostering public discussion of issues of note, is the kind of thing that we want to encourage, and so that's why the fair use exception exists. Education is another area. But, if you're just doing a fan podcast and you decide you want to play, the Rolling Stones today, even if it's only 9 seconds, the Rolling Stones there's a market for that. They get paid for licenses, and so you're undermining that, even if what you're doing is for free. You're not making a profit from it. Yeah,
so, when it comes to music and it comes to your podcast theme song, best advice?
Well, get a custom written theme song. Get a musician or composer to write something for you, or get some live royalty-free production music or something like that, and use that as your theme music. Or go to one of these outfits that puts together custom intros, and they have the royalty-free music to use and sound effects and all that kind of stuff. Frankly, it sounds great when you do that too. So, there's a little bit of expense, but it's a lot cheaper than paying lawyers to defend you in a lawsuit.
Yeah. Well, I just really love that the AC/DC song, so I'm going to roll the dice, right?
Okay.
What
Mark Maron did.
Now, I don't know if you saw the news.
No, I'm playing part of the podcaster who doesn't have a budget, right? They refuse to spend $10 on whatever, or get Creative Commons music. We have Creative Commons that we can slot in there too, which is, I think a great option.
Absolutely.
But I'm just resistant, and I'm going to roll the dice. Probably not going to get caught. What am I opening myself up to?
Well, if you do something with YouTube, that content analysis software that they use is going to pick it up. It has false positives. That's another concern, an issue that we.
I've gotten that. I've fought those successfully. They do have false positives.
Yeah, you can fight it, but again, you're going to spend a lot of time and energy doing that. Do you take your chances? Maybe. The downside is if you do get caught, it's a colossal mess to unravel.
And I'm thinking, what about your back catalog? So what if you go 300 episodes, you're fine, but then you get caught because podcasting's popular, whatever the reason is. Now what are you going to do with your back catalog? You're in trouble, right?
It's coming down. It's coming down. It's never going to be heard again. And you want to have a long tail of that back catalog. That's part of what's great about podcasting. That's out there forever.
Yeah. Dave, anything else when it comes to music?
Just that
questions you hear.
Oh, questions.
What's the most common thing? We
that's
covered
the same
it, right?
thing. What if I talk over it? I hear that a lot. If I talk over it, then they can't really. So I'm stopping somebody from downloading it. So I hear that a lot. If I talk over it, and it's
there are also there's another wrinkle to this, and that when you're dealing with music. There are actually multiple copyrights to be concerned with. The one is the songwriter. What the songwriter wrote is the musical composition, and that is owned by either the songwriter or the music publishing company that represents the songwriter. But there's also, in most instances, you're not playing it live on your little keyboard in your studio, right, or your ukulele. So you've got a recording that belongs to a record company, and that's a separate copyright. So you might have the daggers coming at you from multiple directions too, so it's just another thing to be concerned about.
Yeah, and then the one that I just got today was, I've heard you play it on your podcast, so can I play it on mine? And as my mother used to say, if Johnny Johnson jumps off the Empire State Building, will you? And I had to tell him, I said, no, I went through the channels, I got the proper permission from everybody, and they gave me permission, but I don't have permission to let you do it. You got to go back to the musician and the writer and everybody else. So
exactly.
Yeah, that was one of them.
Dave, your mom is gory. I got to jump off a bridge. Empire State Building, whole new level of of following someone off the edge. Greg, were you going to say something?
No, not really. But you do have. Actually, in my situation, my wife. I was lucky enough. My wife is a professional musician. She did my intro. So you do it yourself, you're going to be safe. If people can recognize that 7 seconds, then you're borrowing somebody else's work. 7 seconds, 2 seconds even. It's somebody's going to be coming after you if there's enough money in it.
That's it.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, with Dan Miller, when I talked to him at New Media Expo, he said it took him 9 months to work out that deal for whatever it is. Like I think he said it's $100 a year. But he said he would constantly, he'd come to an agreement, then they'd send it back, and you'd have to X out more, and they just, the music industry just doesn't get podcasting. They don't know what to do with it. And so it took him a long time to back and forth and back and forth and back and forth before they finally came up with something that he could do and use.
And it's an industry that's on the ropes, and so they're not particularly excited about giving things away that they might end up, they had a problem with terrestrial radio. Nowadays they get paid, the record companies get paid when music is used on satellite radio, Pandora, those kinds of things. But they don't get paid when it's on traditional old-fashioned broadcast radio, because back in the 30s they gave away that area, and they don't want to give away another area and end up, sort of on the outside looking in again, especially when they're having such a hard time selling records these days.
Cool. Well, I think we did a good job at attacking the music thing. If you have any questions, obviously get in touch with Gordon. Put them in the chat room so we can see them. I'm Dave. I don't know. Dave, were you able to monitor the chat room? Hopefully, with all my issues. I'm not seeing anything right now, but
I'm trying, but it's archaic. I'm doing it on an iPad.
I just want to make sure we're not missing something. So I'll keep looking. But Greg, let's get you in here a little bit. I think you mentioned you could give us a really brief update on the podcasting. Daniel might be popping in, but a really brief update on the patent trolls, or the LLC. What's the company? Personal Audio, and their suit against podcasters, and what's the status of that? Are we going to get sued?
Short answer, no. You wanted the short answer. I think the shortest answer and the best answer is for people that make just a little bit of money or no money, like a good bit of us out there on their podcast, you don't have anything to worry about. The Corolla lawsuit, they settled that. The Personal Audio has actually put out a press release. I've got a post on my website where they say that they are not going to go after podcasters that make small amounts of money. They mention certain podcasters, the Nerdist, blah blah blah. And that's sort of unusual for somebody to concede they're not going to sue someone when they're. But anyway, the point is, for the ordinary day-to-day podcaster, I don't think there's any problem. I think what's happening is Personal Audio found out there's no money in it. I think some of us might have known a little bit of that already, but there's, as they like to say, there's dozens of dollars to be made in the podcast business.
Dozens of dollars, yes, there is dozens of dollars. So that's cool, but what about, we're all striving to grow our shows, be more successful. Some of us want to make money, and what happens when we get huge? So we have to worry about getting huge, and then they're going to come after us?
They dropped it against Corolla. They're going after the CBSs, the networks, where they see that as the lower hanging, more expensive kind of fruit.
So when you mentioned Nerdist, are they even classifying those guys as not enough money? Because I know that they kind of said Corolla there wasn't enough money in it.
I'll read it real quickly. Nerdist, Earwolf, Podcast One, Joe Rogan, Mark Maron, Jay Moore. Those people are not going to get sued because it's perceived, this is in a press release that Personal Audio put out saying we're not going to go after these types.
Yeah. And I think we're hinging, the big hope, I think, it hinges on the case that the EFF is making, and that's going to invalidate the patent, right? Is there a possibility of that?
There is. That hasn't come as easily as everybody had hoped it would, but the case is still out there. It's being reviewed separately in front of the patent office, and I think it's going to probably come up for a decision sometime next year. EFF is really pushing it because that's their thing. They like to come out and burn people that try to use the patent system improperly. So they, I think, have a little bit of more interest now, obviously, than Corolla does. He's out of it. They were a little disappointed that he dropped out, but business is business. The point is that this is my understanding. The point is, for the average Joe, I don't think there's a big worry. One other thing that's interesting, that this patent is so old, it's going to expire in about 2 years. So this is not something that's going to be around forever. Because it's sort of unique old patent, and they were then recently able to get this protection. The fact is they filed this application around 18 years ago, and patents only last 20 years from their filing date.
They lose it. Can they re-up this, or they lose it in 2 years?
No, they lose it. It's gone. It's unlike a trademark that can be renewed. It cannot be renewed.
That's the first time I've heard that. That's encouraging.
That's beautiful noise, yeah.
Tie them up in court for 2 years, but that costs a lot of money, right? So hopefully we won't have to do that.
And I'll just wrap that up. They sued CBS. They got $1.2 million out of CBS about a month or so ago, I think.
Right.
Honestly, that's not a whole lot of money in big patent litigation, and they probably spent half of that in lawyers' fees trying to get it, maybe more.
Yeah.
Just wasn't a big case.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I see Daniel trying to work his way in here. Hopefully he'll pop in and we'll talk to him.
That's really good news, because worst case scenario, if we lost every case there was, Jay Moore gets hundreds of thousands of downloads per episode. That's a huge podcast compared to the average Joe Schmo. And if they're not going to sue him, if you've been worried about being sued, yeah, you're not going to get sued. And then, by the time you get to that kind of download numbers, it's going to be kaput. So
yeah, it's encouraging, I guess. But the whole thing just kind of sucked. Briefly, we hear this comment all the time. Great, they say the podcast, or they say the patent system is broken. Do you agree with it? Was broken the right word?
Actually, I don't think so. I've been doing this 30 years. The broken ones are the ones that make the biggest news. But frankly, for a government system, it works pretty well. It's run by the U.S. government, which is not perfect, and I've got a little bias. But honestly, the patent office it pays its own way in fees. It's not a real money sucker as far as tax revenue. It runs itself fairly well. Again, I think the ones that the bad cases, the ones that get the attention from the media, which is not unusual.
Yeah. All right. So I had some stuff come in on the event page, or the Google Plus page, where you can chat and participate. It's a great place to get your questions. And in fact, I put the link in the show notes to the event page, because oftentimes people share links and all their feedback. It's a great resource to go back to, especially if you're looking for a link or something that someone mentioned, right? An answer. It's usually in there. But from that page, before we even started, some legal questions, I guess you call them, came in. And see, David Anderson, Mr. Anderson, that's a little Matrix joke there. But he said, don't forget to cover defamation as well. He says, Australian law is quite different to U.S., and there are some interesting interpretations of where you publish. Is it where you live or where the listener/reader lives? And John Valentine follows it up. He says that David beat him to that one. He says, when broadcasting globally, he assumes you can be challenged by local laws, which may vary widely in their scope and interpretation. So, Gordon?
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so let's back up and just talk about what defamation is, so we have the context, and then we can talk about why that's a concern from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So basically, defamation is when you tell lies about somebody and you hurt their reputation because you're publishing false information that harms them. So here in the States, again, we have the First Amendment, free speech, so we have a fairly rigid set of rules that defines when it's defamation and when it's not. We're allowed to express our opinions about people. If it's not couched in terms of being factual, it won't be treated as defamation. Defamation, when it's spoken word, is slander, and when it's printed or recorded or published, it's libel, basically. So the case that these folks were referring to in Australia was a court that held that the publication occurs where the download occurs, where the listener happens to be. And so if the injury happens to somebody in Australia, then they can sue in Australia and have a judgment against the podcaster or the publisher. The trouble is the courts in Australia may or may not really have jurisdiction over the person in question. And so while, yes, I think, and I didn't read the case that was cited in that situation, I don't think they had a way of getting at the actual person or his bank accounts unless he was in Australia. And obviously it wasn't, otherwise we wouldn't be having the conversation about this. If you're, the bottom line is this: if you are putting out information and you're not inaccurate and you cause injury to somebody, you need to be prepared to defend yourself where that somebody is, if you happen to go there and get grabbed up.
So US based podcaster calls out an Australian and defames him and just says absolutely false things about them. They have to be prepared to defend themselves.
Well, if that podcaster winds up in Australia or has assets in Australia or that the Australian courts can reach, then that's exposed to the liability for it. I mean, he may not have to actually go and defend the lawsuit there if he's willing to just let a judgment happen. And, I don't think the U.S. would enforce. There's international law concerns here.
Sure.
Doctrine called, I can't remember the international law doctrine, but, where we basically have to respect other countries' laws. But if it's in conflict with our own, then we won't. And the First Amendment conflicts with a lot of these rules. Interestingly, the countries like Australia that were part of the British Commonwealth is where you see this stuff coming up a lot, because defamation in England, especially dealing with the nobility and the royals, it was very easy to defame them and very hard to get out of the hot water when you did. And so the U.S., because of the free speech thing, has sort of gone in a slightly different direction. Right.
So situations that we're probably not going to run into much, but I described in the description of this round that podcasting is always, you kind of hear it called the wild, wild west of media, because you can say anything you want, and so this does leave you up to leaves it up to the individual and amateur hour, right? Anyone can start a podcast, so anyone can get on a podcast and rant away. What's the general? I mean, I'm sure this happens every day, right? So for podcasters, when they're just saying so and so sucks, what's the general sort of rule of thumb or best advice to a podcaster who maybe should think twice about who they're calling out?
Well, look, in most instances, the call out has to actually be damaging to the reputation of the person on the receiving end, and just saying somebody sucks probably doesn't really hurt their reputation. If you say that guy's a thief or the classic.
What if you called them a liar?
Did you say liar or lawyer?
Liar. I said no.
Lawyer's legit.
Yeah. No, liar.
Well, it depends who they are and whether truth is something that there is expected of them professionally, I suppose. I mean,
Dave sounds like he's referring to something recent or some experience he's had.
I was going to say, you got to be careful, especially if something gets you emotionally charged and a video camera is running, because I thought about it right now that what I said in that video, I have nothing to back up to say here on this day, because what I did is I bought a software program that said you have an hour and like 10 minutes to buy this or you're going to lose a $100 discount. I went back 2 days later and it says I have 3 days before the discount runs out. And I like popped a cork. I literally popped a cork. And I thought, I don't have a screenshot of that from Sunday night going, you have an hour. So I can prove that, no, they said that, I know it, I saw it, but I was not happy when I saw that.
I saw your video, Dave. I don't think you defamed anybody. But this is not legal advice.
Right.
No, I mean, the fact is, look, the general golden rule: do unto others, treat people nicely, be a good person, don't tell lies about people. That's what we really need to do here. And in most cases, if you follow those rules, you're gonna be fine. Now, there are plenty of people who make a career out of being snarky and being nasty to people and calling people out on their BS and things like that. And again, if you're expressing your opinion of something, that's you're entitled to your opinion, as long as it's a genuinely held opinion. It's, whether it's right or not is not an issue. It's your opinion. It's real. So you got to be careful. There are some areas that you can't get away with, like calling a woman unchaste or accusing somebody of having a loathsome disease or something like that. But again, how often do you say, in my opinion, so and so has herpes? Those are the per se kinds of libel, but and I don't know how loathsome that is, but anyway, most of the time when you're talking smack about somebody, it's opinion and it's not factual. It's when you start to do the detailed analysis of somebody's conduct and behavior, which is, you get into it with the software guy who oversold his product and lied about the scarcity of the product and whatnot. You get into it a little bit. It starts to look more and more factual in its tone, but generally you're talking about opinion. Okay.
So and Greg, just this is a call to Roundtable. So when you have, just jump in, interject. Don't wait for a question. If you've got something to interject, feel free to jump in. That goes for everybody. But Daniel looks like he's finally arrived. So welcome, Daniel. Uh-oh.
He's muted still. I think, Dave, you muted him, Ray.
He's not showing as muted on my side.
Oh, okay.
All right, but we'll move on. We'll see what's going on. And, so let's go on to another topic here. Let's look here. Gordon, actually, no, the FTC. What do we need to know about the guidelines? These came out, a couple years ago, Dave?
Yeah, the whole thing, you had,
Affiliate,
I think it's the affiliate stuff and the whole Acacia, something berry that Oprah talked about. It was this purple berry that if you ate it, you just lost weight. You don't have to exercise. And everybody and their brother was touting this thing, and they were not saying, oh, by the way, if you buy through my link, I'm going to make a commission. And it was just huge. There's a couple things. There's the Oprah effect, the Dr. Oz effect. Anytime those two guys talk about anything, if there's an affiliate program, websites pop up sprouting, the joys of whatever that particular no exercise kind of, cure-all pill will do. And I think that's one of the things, and I could be wrong, but it seemed like it came up around that all of a sudden it was like you have to note that, hey, by the way, you have to note that there are affiliate links here so that people know that you might be getting paid,
Yeah, there are a couple different parts to this thing. The FTC issued some regulations that talk about endorsements and affiliate linking and those kinds of things. The Oprah and Dr. Oz thing was sort of the flip side, where their images and likeness were falsely being used. They were not actually endorsing these products, but the people who were selling were using their pictures and their names to try to sell it and to basically lie about the fact that they were endorsing it. Because they had spoken about it on their TV shows, they were being quoted, and that was being treated as an endorsement, and that wasn't really what was going on. So the flip side of that, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. I was just going to say, because we're running the show on time, we started late, so we got a little more time. But when podcasters they're selling something, or they're an affiliate for something, they're mentioning something on their show, which I guess stands to make them money, right?
Yeah.
What do we got to know about that?
So anytime you as a podcaster are promoting a product, endorsing a product, or pointing people at a link where you're going to make some money, yeah, you need to disclose that fact. The FTC expects that you're going to make a clear and conspicuous statement that you're going to make some money if they follow this link and buy the product.
This is tough to do, though, on Twitter. I mean, I tweet out affiliate links all the time because I'm saying, hey, this new microphone came out. It's really cool because I genuinely recommend it and like it. I got 140 characters. Affiliate link, that's a long 2 words.
It's 12 words.
It's not happening. It's not happening.
Well, can you add, in square brackets, can you add AFF after the link? That's what I try to do. Is that
This clearly does not happen often, though. Most people do not do this. right?
Right. I think that we as a society, the users of Twitter are starting to recognize that when we see those abbreviated links, if it's not just, the latest pictures of Miley Cyrus doing something stupid, and it goes to a product, we can probably expect that there's an affiliate link behind it. And Twitter is a hard one because it's such a limited palette to work on. How do you go about making that disclosure? Do you have to bring them to a landing page before they go to it? Probably not.
And Daniel, how do you handle this in your podcast? Because I tell people, I don't know if I don't have a lot of sponsors. If I say my gear page, on my gear page, there's like an asterisk that says, basically consider anything you click could be an affiliate link, pretty much. But Daniel, when you send people to an affiliate, right, to sign up for web hosting, do you say every time, or how do you handle it on your website?
I say something that usually, as often as I can, I do try to say this is an affiliate link or something like that. In my show notes, I now use a short code at the bottom. So every post, in the post, so if someone's reading it through an RSS reader, it does say, this post may contain affiliate links by which I'll profit. It says that in the footer of the website. And when I'm corresponding directly with someone, I'll try to say something like, here is my affiliate link for this, or something like that, labeling it. One thing I'd like to ask you about, Gordon, on the same topic is kind of the flip side of endorsements.
Yeah.
I hear podcasters where they say, this podcast is brought to you by Bluehost. And it's not. They're using a Bluehost affiliate link, but they're making it sound like, and sometimes they'll even say it's sponsored by Bluehost. Is that troublesome?
I'm not sure. First of all, I think what you are doing with the affiliate link, just to put an end point on that, I think you're doing sort of the best practice on that, and that is to be as clear and conspicuous as possible about it. When you say, I think it's misleading to say that they're the sponsor or that it's brought to you by, although the substance of it or the implication is there's money changing hands, and that's what's really important for us consumers to know. So I don't know that anybody's going to get nailed for doing that. Although I guess if Bluehost wanted to say, no, wait a minute, we aren't sponsoring that show. We don't think that's a fair characterization because it suggests that we've made a affirmative decision to back that show over others. I think they'd have a reasonable basis to put a stop to it. But is it running afoul of the FTC rules? I'm not so sure. Greg, do you have a thought on that?
No, I honestly don't have any FTC comments.
Okay.
What about interviewees? Being interviewed, contract. Do we need to permissions? Let's talk about permissions. Like when someone comes on our show, are we then free to promote that how we want? What can we? I think a lot of people ask for. At work we do video all the time, and we ask for permission to use their voice and image. Yeah. But most podcasters I don't think do that.
Right. I think the best practice is to get them to, best practice would be have them sign a piece of paper that you put in a file and you wave it in front of the court if it ever comes up. I don't think that's...
Is email good enough for that? Is that considered paper now?
If there's an evidence of a meeting of the minds, that there's some kind of an agreement between the parties that of the purpose behind what's happening, yes, I think that works. The real issue that I think comes up is when I agree to go on your Podcasters Roundtable, and 2 years from now you've packaged this all up and you're selling it as a product and making license fees from it or something like that. That's where we may not have that meeting of the minds anymore. That I agreed to go on a Google Hangout on air. Sure. I didn't agree to that you could sell my performance for profit.
What if I monetize this episode or this show at a later date and don't share those profits?
I think it's less about the sharing of the profits than about what I knew or could reasonably have expected to be the situation. And so what I think the right approach is ask the person while the recorder is going, hey, do I have permission to use this in any and all media forever and ever without any restrictions? And when they say, sure, you're done, right? Better to have that in writing on a piece of paper with all the usual legal boilerplate. It's only about a half a page long. But as a practical matter, get me recorded saying that. It's going to be pretty hard for me to go into court saying, well, that's not what I meant.
Yeah. Are there any Do you have a blog? Your show? Is your show about this kind of stuff, or you do
Not exactly. So I have several podcasts, but the flagship is called Entertainment Law Update, and it is an update of legal news for entertainment lawyers and other professionals in the entertainment industry. Okay. So we touch on this. We talk about the podcast patent. We talk about the Corolla case. Those kinds of things when they come up. Lately, it's did Manuel Noriega need to give permission for his likeness in a video game? Those kinds of things. Yeah. But
so I was just wondering if they ever blogged. Are there templates for people to go out and get, like, I need a form for interviewees, or I want a form for sponsors, or something like that, for legal jargon, right? Legal jargon.
I have been threatening to put together such a resource for years.
There's a product there. There's a product there. And I do not give you permission to use my idea. I would like a piece of that. I'm just kidding.
And I just haven't done it because frankly there hasn't been that much interest. But anybody who wants to get in touch with me about it, the forms are like I said, very short form, easy things to do. And
awesome. And let's talk about artwork and graphics and all that kind of stuff, right? What issues, Dave, Daniel? What can you think of in terms of that, or what are the bigger issues? We talked about, people always ask about music. We've talked about interviewees and stuff like that. But when it comes to, I guess, your logo, you design logos. Do you see issues there? I mean, you had an issue yourself with the Once podcast.
Right. I made an image for this Once Upon a Time podcast, and I designed it all myself. I purchased the fonts. I found the fonts. I found just the right images. I made this whole thing myself. I did not use Disney imagery. But they contacted me and said, you're using Disney imagery, stop. And then as I explained this whole thing to them, then it was obvious to them, well, I was guilty of making my thing look like theirs. So they just asked me to differentiate it enough to set it apart. And Gordon gave me some tips on some of that too. And I think the issue that most podcasters will face when they're thinking about podcast cover art is using product imagery or logos for the stuff they want to talk about. If you're doing an iPhone podcast, can you display an iPhone on your cover art? Or if you're doing a podcast about the Los Angeles Dodgers, can you use their logo or that kind of stuff?
So a lot of the sports podcasters dealt with this recently, where iTunes came down and said, "Hey, you're using either the Cubs logo or some baseball team logo or football, even the title." I guess Nick, who's been on the show several times, Superling, Who Day Weekly was his show, and Who Day has been considered trademarked, I guess, by the NFL, which seems ridiculous because it's like a chant that the fans came up with, but they saw their opportunity and grabbed it, right? And so he had to rename his show, right?
Yeah, that's an issue. You don't want to be in a situation where there's going to be a confusion about whether there's an implicit relationship and an endorsement or something like that.
So mixing your brand, sort of.
Yeah.
Don't make your brand look like their brand, right? I mean.
Right. That's classic sort of trademark infringement, or dilution is the other term that comes up in here. And you just, Daniel's situation was actually, he created it himself, but it still was confusingly similar to the Disney look and feel for their show, and that was their beef with it.
Right. Don't make your brand look like their brand.
And that's why I think most fan casts usually start off by saying we are an unofficial.
Mm-hmm. They do now.
We are.
Yeah. Saying it's unofficial, but that artwork is such a big identifier in the iTunes store and everywhere else that's where this concern seems to come up the most. Yeah.
What I have seen people do that they're allowed to do is sometimes they will use an official image, but then they border it with their own branding. So like you look at AfterBuzz TV, and they'll use official imagery from the show, but it always has this yellow border and the AfterBuzz TV branding on it, and they've got a great relationship with the network, so I assume they're okay with that. And with my issue with Disney, they said it's okay to use some of these elements, like the blue forest or the silver text, but you just can't use all 6 of these very similar elements. You could use like 3 of them maybe.
Greg?
I was just on past experience. I think Daniel also just had a little bit of bad luck because in the industry you don't mess with the mouse.
That's right. You picked the wrong Titan to copy, I guess, but successfully. It doesn't matter. Daniel, he navigated and has a really successful podcast. So, hey, You know, sometimes following the guys with the big lead is not necessarily so bad, and ask for forgiveness, right? That's not legal advice, obviously. My wife's a lawyer. My wife's a lawyer, not me. So, let's see why I'm not. She doesn't have a podcast. So,
You know what another area I think we ought to talk about is, Ray? Oh, go ahead, Greg.
There is a lot to say in this, even in the legal world, about keeping your nose clean. And if you really did make a genuine mistake, like Daniel did, I mean, 99 out of 100 times, you're going to be okay. It's when you're pushing the envelope, you're copying a W for WordPress. I mean, WordPress probably isn't a good example. You're using a Coca-Cola emblem, sort of, you know, and we all know, wink, wink, what's happening. That's where you get in trouble, not the Daniels.
WordPress is a good example because even Dustin Hartzler, who's been on the show, he had to change his logo or his name, I believe. So
his name, yeah.
So that was a good one. And Daniel, I think you also had a question for Greg, right?
Yeah. So we're talking about different legal issues, copyrights, trademarks, and patents. I wonder, might the average podcaster consider stuff about patents more often? Like, is it anything that we should be thinking about if we describe something in the podcast, like an idea or a method for doing something? Should we be concerned about patenting that, or even just our method for podcasting if we're doing it in a unique way? Is that a patent concern for us as the one who's doing it to maybe copy that, or to protect that?
Well, just using, I guess, a poor but a relevant example is the personal audio situation. They did get a patent over a certain way of recording, distributing, and playing the podcast. Putting all those together is patentable. You know, the one-click concept for Amazon's purchasing, that's patentable. I'm not really sure exactly when you're talking about if you talk about something that you've invented. If you're going to patent that, you need to make sure that you perfect those rights within a year at the latest, because if you talk about something, show it to somebody in a public way, after a year, you're going to lose patent rights if you don't apply for them.
So similar to that, someone asked in the chat. They asked how do they go about copyrighting their website name? But I would say, or as to create a brand myself. He said I had someone offer to buy my domain name off me as well as my social network accounts. That seems like something different. But when we have, so there's copyright, right? And there's, when do we need to file something to make sure we claim that it's ours, whether it's our logo or maybe music that we created or our show, right? Or Daniel, in your case, maybe you're talking about some tech you're going to develop for, I don't know, finding a podcast review or something, right?
Yeah, or even just if we wanted to patent a particular method for doing a mixer mix minus.
Yeah, well, that kind of thing, I'll talk about the patent thing real quickly. Trademarks and copyrights differ, and I'll leave that to Gordon. But the lawyer's answer is do it as early as possible, but no later than 1 year after you've publicly described it to someone, because, again, you've got this 1 year date to do whatever you're going to do with essentially file a patent application in the United States. Trademarks, copyrights, those are different. Again, patents are the mousetrap, the way things work or function. Trademarks are what you call those things. Copyrights is typically artwork, music, that kind of thing. It tends to be a little bit of a catch-all, and I'll leave those deadlines to Gordon. Go ahead, Gordon.
Yeah, I was going to ask too. How do we know we're podcasters, right? And we're not even professional media people. How do we know when we have something that should be protected, right?
Yes,
you kind
exactly.
of mentioned, you sort of delineated things there, but.
Well, on the patent thing, Greg, why don't you talk about what makes a patentable something?
Well, let's just use a mousetrap, for example. That's what people use as an example in our industry. If you've developed something that is new and different, and it's new and different enough in a non-obvious way where somebody in that industry, let's say if there's an industry of making mousetraps, some average engineer in that industry, it wouldn't be obvious to that person to develop your new mousetrap advancement. Technically, that mousetrap advancement is patentable. you lay out your mousetrap advancement on one side of the table. You lay out the rest of the technology in the world on the left side of the table, and you convince a patent examiner that what you have is new and different enough over what else is out there. That is actually a reviewed situation where a patent examiner sits down and reviews it, and it's fairly closely reviewed. That does happen in trademarks. It really doesn't happen in copyrights. The short answer to your question is, how do you know? It's sort of a gut call that you have to make first, and then when are you going to go talk to a lawyer, and what kind of lawyer is that going to be? And as intellectual property attorneys, we typically, if you talk to an intellectual property attorney, that person is going to know a little bit about patents, trademarks, and copyrights, even though they don't maybe specialize in all of them. So just try to find a friend or whatever, and go in the right general direction first, and then drill down as you have to.
What would happen if? Well, go ahead.
No, I was.
What would happen if, kind of in terms of a podcast name, if I decided to do, somebody else starts a podcast called the Podcasters Roundtable or Podcast Quick Tips? What happens there? Because Ray owns both those.
It's a good question too, because I'm sure that several people have. I bet there's more than one show that has maybe the same name in iTunes, right? No one regulates that.
I think actually Apple does sort of watch out so that they're not stepping on each other's, so titles aren't being confused. In fact, I had a situation like that just come up in my practice with a title of a video game that's being sold in the App Store, the iPhone App Store, and we found out that someone else had tried to get a similar game with the same name into the store, and they said no. Which was sort of encouraging. But, the best practice obviously would be do what you can to perfect your rights in your name. And for a title of a show, it would be a trademark. The Trademark Office has it's the same office that handles the patents, by the way, the Patent and Trademark Office. They have some regulations about what can be registered in terms of titles of shows. It would have to be something that's a serial thing, so that a podcast probably qualifies. It has to be distinctive distinctive, not generic or descriptive of the thing. So my show, for example, Entertainment Law Update, very descriptive of what we do on the show. Likewise, the Chicago PD fan podcast doesn't tell us anything that's distinctive. It's just description, and so that's not going to be protectable. Podcasters Roundtable, maybe it's a little more toward distinctive. So what you have to do is earn that distinctive label by using it long enough that it becomes identified by the public as that particular Podcasters Roundtable. Secondary meaning is the term we use in this area. And so after you've been 38 episodes in, you probably do have the makings of some acquired distinctiveness now. And so you could probably register a trademark at least on the supplemental register, and sort of keep working at it to prevent others from coming into the space and adopting the same or confusingly similar name.
Do we have any rights if we haven't registered it? Like even to go after social accounts? For example, I know this name would be too long for it, but for example, if someone on Twitter registered the name The Audacity to Podcast, which is a trademark I've been claiming as unregistered though, and using since 2010, could I approach Twitter and say, this is my trademark, no, it's not registered, but I still have rights, do I?
Yes. I don't know about how Twitter will handle it, but there is a common law right of like a trademark. Plus, each state probably has some rules about this kind of thing. But whether Twitter will honor that and seize the name from the other guy is a function of their terms of service and how they handle those things. I know that if someone adopts your real surname, your real identity, and you can prove that you've built it up and it's not John Smith or something very neutral and generic, they'll do some steps to make sure you get the right to it. But yeah, it can be a challenge. The registered trademark is the strongest kind of protection. Corporate name is another area that comes up also.
So, with podcasters, moving out of this topic, it's probably difficult to go and get a trademark or something. Do we need to do this, or is this just sort of icing on the cake, right? Extra protection. I mean, no, it's protection, but what's the advice to podcasters when it comes to trademarks and copyright?
Well, I think it depends how you think about your podcast. If you are building a business around it or using it to support a business and the business name is important and valuable, then I think it's time to think about registering a trademark, assuming that it's not that descriptive stuff. It has to be, distinctive enough that people will identify it. And but yeah, I think it's worthwhile. It's not colossally expensive to register a trademark. It's a few $100s in filing fees, and some people can do it themselves. There's the services out there. I hate to recommend the LegalZooms and those kinds of folks, but for a very basic thing, sometimes that works. And guys like us, Greg and I, make some of our money by fixing things when people don't do it right using those things.
Related to that, so when should a podcast consider being like an LLC, right? And maybe which option is best for a podcast? LLC, incorporate, whatever.
I don't think we can give a clear and generic universal piece of advice on that subject here. There's some analysis that needs to go into it. A corporation or an LLC is a great idea if you have a need for some kind of protection, if you have other assets that you want to keep separate from your podcast, if you're starting to generate revenue and you want to have some tax planning or retirement planning stuff that comes into play. These are the kinds of reasons you go and form an entity, or if you need to raise financing by selling shares and equity of the company.
Well, a lot of podcasters have either a product or they do consulting, right? Mm-hmm. So they do monetize their podcast in those sort of third-party ways.
Yeah.
At that point, I'm making some money. Do you then need to be, because you want to keep your personal income or your personal funds away from any kind of protected thing. If we're giving advice or we're selling a product or how does that for the average podcasters who's doing something like that?
I think it makes a lot of sense. If you are running a business, you want to keep that business separate in some ways from your personal. You're going to have separate bank accounts. You're going to have separate other. Forming an entity makes a lot of sense in that scenario, and it does give you some flexibility in planning for retirement and how you adjust for your taxes. If you have a lot of income one year and less the next, there are ways to even using these entities. So lots of both tax and legal liability reasons to do it, but there's a threshold. You have to be making a certain amount of money for it to make sense.
Oh, and that's why. What's that? Any insight into that threshold?
Talk to your accountant. It's going to be different from state. Here in California,
that's what I mean. Legally,
okay. Yeah. Here in California, we have a very high minimum state tax, and so forming an entity means you're going to be paying $800 in taxes that you wouldn't otherwise. So you have to realize that savings somewhere else for it to make sense. So it's an accounting question.
Gotcha. And you actually said that someone contacted you and had a question that you'd hope we covered, and that was if you accept payment from your podcast guests, do you need to disclose it? This is kind of like the FTC stuff we talked, not saying it's the same. I'm saying that we're receiving some benefit from it. That in this case, the guest is, I guess, paying to appear on our podcast. Is that?
Wow. Yeah, I've never heard of that. I wish that could happen more often.
Well, I will say that I think now I don't know if John Lee Dumas, who has this popular podcast where people come on, I'm not sure if some people now at this point, he's probably so saturated, may have to actually pay to get on. I don't know, Daniel, if you. I thought he mentioned that, but
I don't know. I was on his, I think, 549th episode this year, and he didn't charge.
Not all of them, but I think people who especially want to get in front, or you know what, they may. I guess he's a good example of someone who has the opportunity that I bet people are offering to pay to be on the show, to be interviewed, right?
Yeah, my personal feeling is that I think you should, if you're doing that, if you're taking money to have this person as your guest, I think you need to say so somehow. Otherwise, there is an implicit endorsement of the person. Especially if you have the kind of show where you've sought out people of a certain caliber, a certain level over time, and now this person's paying to get on because now it gives them the imprimatur of that same degree of success or caliber.
Are we legally bound to do anything in terms of saying, hey, they paid for this?
Probably not. I think that the danger is that when the public finds out and you weren't upfront about it,
right,
your reputation goes in the toilet.
What about, could you say this episode is sponsored by Gordon Firemark and Gordon is my guest today? Would that cover your bases?
Yeah, I think that
would
would
help.
be the right way to handle it. Yeah, yeah.
That sounds a lot better than saying Gordon paid to be on this episode.
Yeah, Gordon wants to be famous so much.
How about what about the flip side? What about paying people to appear on the show? So I really want this really big person to be on my show. I'm going to throw whatever amount of cash at them to get them on. Any different?
Yeah, I think it is a little different.
It's almost like paying for a Facebook. I want to be in. I want to get certain people, right? Because we talk about it all the time when we're talking about growing your show. We say have people who have a following already. Get them on your show, right? So turns out I need to give this guy, $400 to get him on the show. But when I got his name, it's searchable on iTunes.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's I now can go out to Facebook and advertise against his name. So.
Yeah. Again, I think you find a subtle way to do it, and that isn't isn't going to trash anybody's reputation, and you do it. But it makes sense to do it. I had never thought of that before. That's
if you're John Lee Dumas, you just tell everybody. I hired Jamie Tardy, and she introduced me to all these people.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
these days it's called transparency, and it's invited.
Yeah,
Please be
he's been
transparent.
completely open about it. So
hey, what about we all should be or are already probably are building email lists. There was some recent stuff with canned spam laws, and if I send an email to a Canadian, love you Canada, do I have to worry about the fact that I'm sending them multiple emails? Do you know anything about the new email laws?
I don't know much about it myself. I mean, as an internet marketer myself, I'm doing this stuff, so I sort of pay attention. What I do is I trust my email provider, in this case AWeber, to think about it for me and to let me know if there's something new I need to know. If you're doing and most of these email systems are going to prevent you from sending out thousands and thousands of emails all at once from your regular email account. But I mean, again, you want to get permission to send them the information, and these systems all have these double opt-ins and things like that. I think that, fortunately, the AWebers and the Infusionsofts know how to handle this, and they take care of it for us.
Yeah. Any other questions? I had a really good question come up while you were thinking, then I switched back to the email thought. So anyone else who has a question, I really want to try to remember what I was going to bring up. But
I have something I think we ought to mention, just because a lot of podcasters work as teams, or they have a co-host or something like that, and that sometimes leads to disagreements about who owns the show. Or if there's a parting of the ways, the divorce, what happens to the show?
Well, this show's a good example. I mean, I ask anyone. A lot of people who listen to this show or watch the show right now are pretty familiar with. I mean, Dave and Daniel Braun as co-host. They may have no clue where the show originated, which I started it, but I invite Dave and Daniel on all the time. And I will say one of the reasons I don't monetize is because then I feel like they should get a share of that, and it just becomes difficult, and people. They worry about things. So I like where you're going with that. So yeah, talk about co-host and when it's going good, I imagine it's probably best if you're planning to do that stuff to sign into some type of contract, right? And then when it goes bad.
Yeah, that's where I was going with it. If you're going to get into a marriage, you want to have some kind of a prenuptial agreement. Now,
Dave, I do.
The trick is having the conversation in a way that nobody gets upset, although I'd rather know someone's going to be that way now than a year down the line when we've built something and we're starting to see some momentum happening. So, yeah, I mean, I think you want to have some kind of, it can be a very simple agreement, but I'll tell you, for an example, in my situation, I have a co-host on my Entertainment Law Update show. And when we first had our first talk, I turned on the recorder and I said, so let's just get a couple things clear. Here's what I envision. You're my co-host, but this is my show, and it's sort of mine to steer in whatever direction I want. And she said, yeah, of course. And that's all we needed to do. Having a partnership agreement or something might have made some sense if we were going to split things equally. Just the point being, be out in front of the issues so you don't have a big dispute and fight down the line when it's really uncomfortable.
So Daniel and Dave, you got that, right? Ditto? Okay, we're good.
Yeah.
Consider it binding.
Well, that and just money changes everything. If you're like, oh, I've known this guy, we grew up together, we're like brothers, and then all of a sudden you're like, what? We got $1,000 sponsorship. Well, there, I know I'm going to spend my $500. What do you mean I get $300? And it's all. So if you
Yeah.
have that awkward conversation up front, you get it over with. If you want to, I don't know, pinky swear, whatever it's going to take, I would probably suggest some sort of, Word document, something to get on an actual same page.
Sure.
And then once that's done, then you can go back and completely focus on, making great content. That way, if Bert quits, Ernie can carry on without him.
Right, and back to the LLC or corporation issue is that's the time when you have those conversations as well. As long as you're forming the entity, you figure out who owns how much of the company and those kinds of things. So that makes sense.
And this is something you can do 38 episodes or rounds into it, right? If you decide, hey, you know what, now I'm going to we've built an audience, I'm going to legitimately go out and try to find a sponsorship. It's not like it's too late to have the conversation, right? Or get something down, right? So it's good advice. And I was back to what popped into my head was sort of terms of services and third-party websites. And, a lot of podcasters, or some, will start off on something like Blog Talk Radio. And there's other services that, we all breeze through the terms of services. We half the time don't know who owns what. So as a podcaster who's creating content and we're either hosting it on some third-party side, what do we need to worry about in terms of who owns what? Because I know a lot of people, and I think I've seen this pop up several times on, say, like Stitcher. Some people won't use Stitcher because I read in there that they own my content once I publish on Stitcher, so I don't go to Stitcher.
Yeah. It's been a big issue with even Facebook. Facebook changes their privacy and terms of service all the time and pisses people off, and then they come back and apologize and fix it or not. But the real point, I think, is that we as consumers of these online services need to read the terms of service and understand what we're getting into. I think it was Daniel that brought up the concern about one relative newcomer to the podcasting space had terms of service that did exactly as he described, claimed full ownership of the content the moment it was uploaded.
Actually, to be clear, it was not clear, but they've since clarified it. It seems that they have.
So the point is that we want to read the stuff. We want to be mindful of what's in there so that we are going in fully informed and we don't have these surprises later on. We want to own the stuff we create. We got to protect it. We got to be careful about these things. That being said, I think it's also incumbent on these services to be clear in defining it at the outset. And
it's very tough too with the podcast because we distribute wide to everywhere. We blast it out, and in fact, if you're in iTunes, you're in a lot of other places that you didn't necessarily agree to. You probably agreed to it in iTunes because these other podcatchers will use the API or whatever. But Daniel, can you or Dave, can you guys think of any service that you have not used because you thought maybe publishing there meant they own your content?
Well, Blog Talk Radio for the longest time. Yeah, Blog Talk Radio had their terms of service, again, very confusing. And when the guy cornered me at Podcast Movement, he said, I understand why you would think that. I went back and looked at it, and they, again, have changed their terms of service. He said, we never owned your content. He goes, but I can understand why you thought that based on the legal speak. And so they've changed that. But, that used to be one of my things when I was telling people, don't use Blog Talk Radio. Yeah. Now I just have to say their audio stinks.
It's the hard thing because it's all this legalese. And I think, and Gordon, you can correct me if this is wrong, but I think it's generally a good idea to assume that the terms of service is there to protect everybody, you and them. It's not there to try to swear away your firstborn. They want to protect you as much as they want to protect themselves, in a sense. Is that a safer assumption, Gordon, than assuming they're out to get me and that's what this terms of service is for?
Well, let me give you a short course on legal ethics and the obligations of the lawyers who write these terms of service. We only have one client, and that's who we protect. Okay. So, and we would be committing malpractice if we didn't really take that seriously. Now, sometimes taking that seriously means being very magnanimous and generous about being even-handed about the rights and things like that, but that has to be in the client's best interest to do that. Sometimes it's in the client's best interest to claim, we own everything, and then let the the public say, wait a minute, no, that's not okay, and then we adjust accordingly. And that's what's happened with Facebook over and over again. We've seen them move the line a little too far and then step back, and move the line a little too far and step back, because they're waiting to see what the market is how it's reacting to these things. In the case of this newcomer that I was referring to, I think it was just they used some catch-all language from terms of service for sites that take user-generated content, and again, to try to protect the company, they went a little farther. The lawyers went a little farther than they should have, partly because the communication probably wasn't there with what the real intent of this business was. So,
yeah, I know. Back in the day of Podshow and then later Mevio, they had a clause that basically said we reserve the right to do. It's like you owned it, but we could do whatever we wanted with your content. Mm-hmm. And it sounds really like, oh my gosh, they can do whatever. Well, they wanted to be able to promote your stuff. They wanted to take clips and things like that, but it didn't say that. But if you read that, like, oh, they can do whatever they want. That means they could sell it. And I'm like, well, yeah, they could, but you kind of have to know the company. But you got to realize that does mean they could sell it and not give you a dime.
Stitcher is like that too.
People to put ads over your stuff. Stitcher, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's just something you got to know. I mean, you got to make a decision of, do you want to get in front of? They're offering you more eyeballs or ears and
yeah. And context counts for a lot, and the reputability of the company counts for a lot. And you can accept terms of service that have those broad generalizations from a company you really trust, but when it's a brand newcomer in the marketplace and you don't know anything about the people behind it and those kinds of things, you want to be a little more vigilant. Also, I think. I mean, in a perfect world, we'd be vigilant all the time, but we can't go around with lawyers standing looking over our shoulders every 10 seconds. So.
What does a podcaster who doesn't make money from their show, but seems to have some type of legal beef with someone else, do they come to you for advice? I mean, I can't hire a lawyer, but it's like, cease and desist. Sometimes can you send a letter and say, hey, maybe get advice from a lawyer and say, I need you to stop doing whatever it is you're doing, right? I imagine that a lot of podcasters just aren't going to have the ability to fight anyone for anything that's infringed upon. So,
yeah, it's true. I mean, hiring lawyers can be an expensive process, but it doesn't always have to be. I mean, there are ways to get a short. If it's a simple question, a quick answer can come. If it's serious enough that you think you need a lawyer, you probably do. That's my take on it. But I want to say one thing about cease and desist letters, because it seems like a good idea sometimes, but my experience is that it almost never is a swift resolution to the problem. It's the first shot in a long battle that goes on.
Seems to work a lot against podcasters, though.
Well,
if you got a personal audio letter, it's like, oh man, I'm shutting down.
Well, there is that. I mean, if you're on the receiving end of a cease and desist letter, I think you do want to consult a lawyer before you respond to it in any way, because people shut down when they didn't really need to, and that's a shame. Yeah. But sending out a cease and desist letter as that small podcaster when somebody's used stuff without permission, there are nice ways to do it and there are harsh ways to do it, and the lawyer letter is not on the nice end of the spectrum. Sorry, they're called nastygrams. So. You catch more flies with honey if you can.
Yeah, because podcasters have certainly run into situations where someone has taken their content and is rebroadcasting. Yeah. I've seen remember, I don't know, Dave, do you remember there was like a company that had us all listed in their directory? Yeah. Was it? Well, there was a few of them. There's a few of them. So in that case, what I did is I went to the biggest podcasters in the group and said, hey, check this out. And I knew that they would sick their people on them and say, what are you doing? Right. But, all right. Well, as we wrap up here, I won't keep anyone any longer. Are there any big things that we didn't cover in terms of what a podcaster is likely to run into, or things that you guys hear often from podcasters? Daniel?
Other thing is, what should you do if someone else is infringing? Do you need to get a lawyer to send a cease and desist, or do you just pleasantly email them and say, hey, could you please not do that? Because this will happen. Either someone will use the same name, sometimes maybe even being in the same space, or they might use images. Like, this has happened to me a couple times where I randomly find one of the images I have created for my website used on someone else's website. And in each case, I've contacted them directly, and they've been very gracious, and they've taken the image down, or they gave me credit. But usually it was I wanted them to take the image down. Mm-hmm. Is that the right way to go about it?
I think so. I think you start at the beginning, and that is ask nicely. And if they're rude to you, if they're difficult about it, if they claim that they don't have to, those kinds of things, that's where you start to escalate things and maybe write them a letter for a next. And then if they respond or don't to that in a way that's not comfortable, then you bring in a lawyer and you do the cease and desist, and the lawyer can sort of explain to them, show them the error of their ways. That's my take on it. I mean, if you have all the money in the world or you're a big company and you need to project an image of strength, it's a slightly different point of view. But ask nicely. You get better results that way most of the time, I think.
Awesome. And we'll use this as the outro. So Daniel, thanks for joining us once again. Where can we find your stuff?
Yeah, I'm Daniel J. Lewis, theaudacitypodcast.com, and at the Ramen Noodle on Twitter.
Awesome. And Dave, again, thanks for helping us out on this round. And if you have any more questions, Dave, we have 2 lawyers. You're not paying by the hour.
I was sitting there thinking, I think I've got them all. Really, the music, trademarks, how much is a trademark? I heard that one answered. You guys did a great job. So,
thanks.
I wish I had more questions.
Next time you're going to have to pay, Dave. Next
I
time
know.
That's a podcasting tip, man. Sometimes, hey, you want some legal advice? Maybe interview Gordon, right? I mean, he's exchanging time for knowledge at this point. So we appreciate that. Gordon, thanks for joining the Roundtable. The first time as a new Roundtabler, you officially anointed a Roundtabler. And where can we find you? I think people are going to probably want to get in touch with you. You do have a little promo. You did not pay for this. you have a book. You have a book about all of this stuff that covers new media producers. Show it to us.
So I just happen to have a copy of the book here in my hand. It's called.
He's from the school of Daniel J. Lewis.
Yeah, right. The Podcast Blog and New Media Producers Legal Survival Guide. It's not a trophy. I wish I had a trophy, but and it's available at podcastlawbook.com. And you can find me at firemark.com. The podcast is entertainmentlawupdate.com. And social media, Firemark, almost everywhere.
Cool. Well, sometimes books pay better than trophies. So yeah.
I do have a question now. Is that book available on a Kindle?
It is in native Kindle format.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised to see actually a hard copy these days. It's like, first step digital, then you have a hard copy. So
I had to have one to give my mother.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, we'll have to have you back and talk about just making physical products if you're a podcaster, because Gordon podcasts and needs something he can sell and send to you in the mail. That's where they bring it to your house and drop it in the little hole. So it's amazing. All right, Greg, thanks for joining us. First time Roundtabler. Sorry. We didn't get too much into patents, but I really appreciate you coming in the Roundtable and sharing what you know of the personal audio patent fight, and something I have not heard. So that was very valuable that this runs out in 2 years. So it's encouraging.
Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. And your wife has a podcast. Do you want to plug? Where do you got your website? Where can we ask you? Where the people who do have more patent questions that I was not able to think of, where can we get a hold of you?
You can. I have the domain Gronholm, GRONHOLM.com, my last name. You can find me there, or I have a podcast, The Patent Podcast.
Perfect. The Patent Podcast. We got it settled. All right. So I will have that link in the show notes at podcastersroundtable.com, and get over there, get on the list, let me know what you want to talk about, and we will have a round about it. So that's it. Until next time, wave everybody.